So it's now my pleasure to bring out an incredible panel of people who are not just leaders that I look up to, but they feel like family because I've known them for quite a while. I remember back in 2015 doing a bipartisan summit with several of our panelists, so I'll go ahead and bring them out. First, we've got Jay Jordan, who's a longtime advocate and criminal justice reformer. Jay's the former executive director at Alliance for Safety and Justice, and he is now serving as vice president of community engagement at our very own Reform Alliance. Next, I'd like to bring out Vinny Schiraldi. He's a criminal justice policy expert and co-director of the Columbia Justice Project. He's also the author of Mass Supervision, Probation and Parole, and the Illusion of Safety and Freedom, and has worked for several mayors and governors leading supervision and public safety reforms. Finally, I'd like to bring out Kemba Smith. Kemba is a shero of mine and received clemency from President Clinton and went on to serve on Virginia's parole board. So from prison to serving on the parole board. She's worked with senior officials at the White House, the United Nations, Congress, and federal and state supervision agencies all across the country. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Like I said, it's fun to see you guys. I remember Kemba and Vinny at the bipartisan summit. Jay, I've known forever, so fun to have a little family moment here. I mentioned a couple of the incredible things that you guys have done. I was told I couldn't have the 10 pages for each one of you that you deserve. But I'd love to kick it off just starting by talking about some of the work that you guys are doing right now, in case people don't know. Kemba, let's start with you.
I've been out for 25 years, and basically I recently had a movie that was released last year, and so I was grateful to be able to work with Represent Justice, where we had an impact campaign that was launched along with the film, because obviously I'm not just putting all my stuff out there for people to be like, oh, poor Kemba. Like, I'm over my trauma and the stuff that I went through. It's all about helping people understand mitigating circumstances that could lead someone down the path of incarceration and humanizing people. And so basically we had this campaign, and it was centered around highlighting women that have experienced intimate partner violence and encouraging governors and the President of the United States to grant clemency to women that have been in those particular situations. So we had over 130 screenings across the country. I was at most of those screenings. And fortunate, there's a character in the film named Michelle West. And so we were advocating for her, getting people to sign petitions, and I think her character being in the film garnered additional support for her, along with the other many advocacy organizations that have been rooting for her. But she was granted clemency just before President Biden went out of office, yes. And I was also granted a full pardon. But basically, since I've been home, I've been told that I'm an OG in the movement, and some of the people that are out here telling their stories, they say they learned it from seeing me while they were inside. And basically, I felt like sharing my story with young people as a credible messenger, what's being done still today, and also to college students and policymakers to influence them by tugging on their heartstrings and moving their minds, because oftentimes you can read law books, journals, and everything, but you have to humanize this situation. And I think Brian Stevenson said, I don't know the quote verbatim, but basically it's me exposing my brokenness. And I know I heard some of the other women speaking earlier, but it's unfortunate that you have to expose that trauma and brokenness in order for our society to understand the act of mercy and grace and giving people second chances.
Amazing. Vinny.
Yeah, so that was really moving. Thank you, Kemba. I used to run the probation department for New York City, and I was just looking up some of the numbers on it. There were 30,000 people under supervision when I ran the department in around 2010, and there are now 10,000. So it's 2/3 less. And the budget was $80 million when I ran it, and it's $127 million now. So in the middle of that, there's this lesson that no matter how much the departments do sometimes, we still want to keep our money, right? We want to feather our own nests very often. And for me, I've continually asked the question that if anybody that was reasonable was offered $127 million to work with 10,000 people who had committed a crime bad enough to pay attention to, but not so bad that you have to lock them up, would you invent probation? And if you did invent probation, what would it look like? Because very often what it looks like is a very rote, simplistic, checkbox activity. People come to you, they piss in a cup, you ask them the same 5 questions you asked them a week before, and then they go forth with very few services and supports. That's not always what it is. There's some definitely good examples of places that are better. But by and large, I think that's the general experience of people under supervision. And I think we have to ask ourselves a question that this thing that supervises 3 million people in the United States of America and contributes 1/4 of the people going to prison every year not for new crimes, but for technical non-criminal violations of probation, is that the best we can get for our money? I think not. I think we should be doing better, and I hope we get to talk about that. Just one other thing. After I left probation, I went to the Columbia Justice Lab, as was said, and worked with a bunch of organizations. I know Donna Hilton's here, the Catal Center, Unchained Reform was involved. There was a bunch of groups that were involved in trying to get legislation passed called the Less is More Act that severely reduced the ability of the state to technically violate people on parole. It shortened parole terms. If people were doing well, they got off parole earlier. And it made it so that even if you did get revoked, you wouldn't get revoked for years, you'd get revoked for weeks. And when we started the campaign, there were over 800 people in Rikers Island who were just waiting for their hearings to occur on a technical violation. There are today less than 20 people in Rikers Island because of that law. And that is so deeply meaningful to those folks. When I was running Rikers Island, which I did for 7 months, right at the end of Mayor de Blasio's term, the governor signed the Less is More Act, and she made it retroactive so that some of the people already in waiting could get out immediately. But she said it's only for people that are there that have been there less than 30 days. And there was one man who was there 31 days. So he wasn't eligible for it. And a few weeks later, he contracted COVID and died. So these are things that have very, very meaningful impact on people's lives, not always as extreme, obviously, as dying, but often take people out of circulation for months and years for very trivial non-criminal behavior. And it's an area I think we've often overlooked, and we really need to pick a fight on it.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. Sometimes we forget how serious it can be, that it's not just that you've been taken out of your home for a couple weeks or that you're not able to go to work and you might lose your employment, but that you might actually lose your life because of a technical violation. Incredible. All right, Jay, what are you up to? What are we doing over at Reform?
That's a loaded question, Jess. Good morning. Oh, come on, y'all. Good morning. I'm gonna say it one more time. Y'all gotta give me some energy. Good morning. All right, now we can start. I'm an organizer, man. We gotta get going. Have church up in this thing. I talk back, man. I need some talking back, all right? Amen? All right. So, I joined Reform in January I think Jex took the helm a year earlier, right?
6 months earlier, yeah.
6 months earlier. And reform has done a lot. I know my son said 20 bills, but it's 21 with Virginia. Clap it up for Virginia. And I was retired. I was done. I was done with organizing. I was doing consulting work, helping organizations, restructure their power building strategy, doing a lot of fund development, restructuring their organizing programs. And then I get a call from Jess, and she's like, come over for a play date, right? So
Kids.
Yeah, for our kids, for the kids. So we go over there, and she slides a computer across the table, and it's an org chart. And I begin to look at the org chart, and she began to talk about her vision for reform, right? About how, being policy first, impact always, and people centered. And she talked about the staff. This really got me. That 30+% of reform staff is impacted. And I thought about it, and I said, okay, let's do it. And when I got over there, I realized it was more than just a mission to reform probation and parole. That was kind of the calling card, right? It's what you say to funders, it's what you say to audiences, it's what you say to lawmakers. But the truth is, it's about changing lives. I remember when I was locked up. I did 7.5 in California State Prison. They didn't have what they have now in prison, right? All the programs, and you can go and get your college degree. They didn't have any of that. And I served my time in level 4 institutions, and it was rough, but I was cutting people's hair, right? I was cutting people's hair, and I thought when I got out, I was going to do the same thing, become a barber, sell real estate, sell insurance. And before I got home, the day I got out, I went to the barbershop, Big Herc's barbershop. I went to his barbershop first, before I even got home. And I sat in Big Herc's chair, and he's laughing, we joking, I'm telling him my whole plan. Herc, I need an apprenticeship. I want that chair right there, Herc. I want that chair right there. I make $1 million right there. I got the whole barbershop popping. And he's like, wait a minute, man, didn't you just leave prison? I'm like, yeah. He said, man, you can't cut hair, you can't sell insurance, or you can't sell real estate. It broke my heart. And I learned that I was not the exception, but I was the rule. I spent the first about 8-9 years of my professional career in organizing and campaigning, trying to figure this out, trying to crack this nut. How do I go from being a skilled worker, a skilled laborer, to being able to change my trajectory economically? And it took us a long time to do it. And I was able to do it, and we'll get into that later. And then I retired. After I got freed, and we freed almost everybody in California by changing the expungement law. We literally rewrote the whole damn thing in California, formerly incarcerated people did. We got 8 million people free, right? 6 million people automatically, 2 million people, all you have to do is file for a petition, and the court has to grant it, because the way we wrote the bill mandated that they grant it, right? Then I retired, because I was done. I was like, look, I'm done, it's over with, I'm free. And I got the call. And I remember the first day I started reform, and I looked around the staff. Actually, it was before I started. Jess had me come in, and I looked around at the staff, and it was apparent that reform was about to embark on something special, right? They're about to embark on something never been done before. She said, hey, we got this federal bill, Safer Supervision Act. We passed the First Step Act before reform was reform, and now we're doing the Second Step Act, and all these people, on federal supervised release will have a chance, to not be sent back, to be incentivized, to get jobs and do all these different things, and it's never been done before. And we want to go deeper in our states. We just don't want to work with organizations. We also want to do in-state partnerships. We want to invest in our organizers, people who are formerly incarcerated in their states, to go deeper and travel around the state and build community. We want to do this in a systematic way where they have tools to do it. We want to expand our policy work under the tutelage of the amazing Aaron Haney in the audience. Give it up for Aaron, y'all. Give it up for Aaron Haney. We want to go deeper and broader in our storytelling. We want to streamline operations so staff don't have to worry about, paychecks and all these different things. Doing something special. So when you ask me what reform is up to, it's more than just policy. It's people. It's more than just changing laws, it's impacting families. And we impact families one by one, we impact communities. We impact communities, we can change this country.
All right. Well, you mentioned one brilliant policy wonk, Erin Haney. We've got another brilliant policy wonk here on the panel. Vinny, I remember, gosh, well, Scarlett, who's my daughter, is in the audience. I think she was like 2 years old. Now she's 10 years old. I came to a white paper release that Columbia Justice Lab had done in New York. And it was like one of the first big white papers on probation and parole. But you've kept at it, and you've continued to push out guidance, and probably most useful to the entire field, you have also been able to really bring in law enforcement voices, right? You're getting the people who we're saying you got to change to come be a part of the change, which is pretty incredible. So you've got your book, Probation, Parole, and the Illusion of Safety and Freedom, coming out. Well, actually, it's recently published, so you guys can buy it online now. Can you talk a little bit about why, under the current system, you believe safety and freedom are an illusion, and what models there are that we can do better with?
Right. Thank you for that. Yeah, so, what's that? Yeah, go get them. So I'm going to start with an example, because I feel like we're talking theoretical, and let me just give you one example that many of you may have heard of. I'm sure folks out there know Nipsey Hussle, who was killed several years ago in Los Angeles, assassinated. There was a gentleman named Kerry Lathan who had done several decades in California prisons, and when he was on his way out, Nipsey Hussle, who also owned a bunch of clothing stores in the LA area, donated some clothing to Kerry's sister, so when he came out, he was presentable. Then later on, Kerry had to go to a funeral of a friend. He went with his nephew, and they decided to buy some clothes at Nipsey Hussle's stores to, kind of give back so they could be presentable when they went to the funeral. That happened to be the moment when Nipsey Hussle was at that store. Kerry Lathan went up to him to thank him, and that's when Nipsey Hussle got shot. So Kerry Lathan was the other person shot that day, and got shot in the back, went to the hospital in Los Angeles. Everybody from the president to the mayor of LA was praising Nipsey Hussle's good work as an advocate and philanthropist. The parole officer goes to the hospital and technically violates Kerry Lathan for associating with someone with a criminal record, right? Nipsey Hussle, who was an alleged gang member on the LA gang list. So there's this illusion of freedom, right? Because you're not quite free when you're on probation and parole. You can't travel out of the county without permission. You can't get a credit card without permission. You can't buy a car without permission. You can't stay out past 7 o'clock at night. You can't associate with someone with a criminal record. At the height of probation, 1 out of 12 black men in America was on probation, at the height of the numbers of people on probation, and 1 out of 3 black men in America, tragically, has a criminal record. So how that 1 out of 12 was not going to associate with that 1 out of 3, nobody knows. And so folks under supervision just aren't quite free. Now, probation and parole were both invented in the 1800s, and there's sort of 3 things they're supposed to do. They're supposed to reduce incarceration by either serving as an early release mechanism through parole or as an alternative to incarceration through probation. They're supposed to rehabilitate people, help them turn their lives around, and in doing so, improve public safety. They don't really improve public safety. The research we looked at and the research we did showed that in places that have more probation and more parole, there's more crime, not less crime. And I think that's because people live on tenterhooks for the whole time they're under supervision, never knowing if somebody's going to swoop in on them and arrest them because they had a beer at a bar, even though they've never had a problem with alcohol, or because they associated, like you two guys couldn't be sitting here right now if you were still on paper. That would be a revocable act, even though you're speaking publicly. And people have been revoked for things like that. And we're talking, as I said, a quarter of the people entering prison in the largest prison system in the world every single year to the tune of billions of dollars. So the thought is to do the kinds of things you were just talking about. Could we revoke fewer people or revoke no people, capture the savings from that, and actually invest in their communities, like you talked about, you're trying to get done, reforms trying to get done in state after state after state? That's why it's an illusion. It's an illusion of both safety and of freedom.
Thank you, Vinny.
Sorry to be Vinny Downer today, okay?
All right, so Kemba, we talked about how you went from prison to the parole board. So you've seen a lot of different angles of parole. First, let me just say there are a lot of people out there who may not know what parole is, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can be stuck in the system: probation, supervision, parole. Can you talk a little bit about what parole is, and then also talk a little bit about, from a parole board experience, some of the considerations that have to go into deciding whether or not a person should be on parole?
Yeah, so I was grateful from me doing work on the ground. I was actually state campaign manager for the ACLU of Virginia, and out of the blue, I got a call from the Secretary of Homeland Security and Public Safety asking me if I was interested in a position on the parole board. And at first I was just like, I don't know, but then from being in my formerly incarcerated community, which wasn't there when I first came out of prison, one of my colleagues, Deanna Hoskins, was just like, heck yeah, to have a seat at the table, why not? And so I did accept the position, but I have to say, even in this conversation, when I took it, I was like, it's interesting that I can serve on the parole board, but yet, there's certain people that I can't get a certain job because of my felony conviction. But with being on the parole board, it's something that I took very seriously as far as somebody that actually had been inside, and I also was representative of being a victim of domestic violence as well. But what most people don't understand is that it's not, when somebody's eligible for parole, it's not an automatic get out of jail card, get out of prison card. Like, you have to meet certain requirements in order to get out. But with my experience with parole varies from different states. In the state of Virginia, parole was abolished actually in 1995. And so there's only two ways to be eligible for parole. Number one, if you are age 60 and you've served 10 years, you will get eligible for parole. And there is 5 parole board members. At the time when I served, there were 3 part-time members and 2 full-time members, and reading over 2,000 cases. Imagine that. And so oftentimes, and this is, I've got the platform, I can share my experience and be transparent. I feel like sometimes with parole boards across the country, some people are just collecting a paycheck because they're overwhelmed with the various amount of volume of cases that they have to read. And one of the things that I dealt with being on the parole board is once we let somebody out, the media focused on, and let me back up. When we let that person out, we're meeting with victims, we're meeting with family members during board appointments. During those board appointments, we find out what kind of resources and support they have. We read to see how much programming they've done. There's a variety of different things, and you pay taxes to help someone change their behavior. There's all these behavior modification classes that a person can take. And so I mentioned that basically you could be 60 and serve 5 years and come out, or 10 years and come out. If you were 65 and did 5 years, you were eligible for parole. There's also geriatric, that's geriatric, but there's also juvenile. There's the Miller versus Alabama U.S. Supreme Court case that basically said that sentencing juveniles to life was unconstitutional. So we would look at these type of cases, and what the public doesn't understand is that majority of those cases are violent cases, sexual cases, and so once we made these decisions and the person came out, basically the media highlighted who that person was decades ago. And that's what causes the fear-mongering across our nation. In particular, most of the time it happens during political seasons. And so for me, this issue shouldn't be political. For me, it was a Democratic governor that appointed me. Once a Republican governor ran, he basically said on day one he was going to fire all 5 of us. Can you imagine all 5 of us stepping down and an agency having to start from scratch with 5 new members? And so, you know, it's just really unfortunate. And again, that's why the power of storytelling. I feel like paroling agencies across the country, it's their responsibility because, number one, their responsibility, I took an oath that I would honor the legislation and afford people second chances if they check those boxes. And so it's up to parole representatives to highlight those success stories and not allow politicians to demonize human beings that have worked really hard to change who they were. And the truth be told, when they come out, most of the time they're dedicating their future lives to that person that they harmed and wanting to do something better. So I just feel like there needs to be more education in educating the public, and parole agencies need to be highlighting the success stories so our neighbors can stop being afraid of us coming home.
Absolutely. I mean, you look all the way back to Willie Horton, right? And this is how politicians think they can get elected, which is why it's so important for all the work of the groups out there and all of these other groups to be changing that narrative and reducing that stigma. So Jay, you transitioned from prison to supervision, and you were able to find that first job. You were able to get stable housing, both of which are huge feats, and you really set up a life for yourself after incarceration. Now got 2 adorable little boys running around, beautiful wife. You've been able to work with hundreds of people through the same transition, and you often talk about post-incarceration poverty. One of my favorite things that you brought to our office at Reform is the way that you're talking about probation and parole as an economic hardship, right? Not just an economic hardship that have impacted you or impacted your community, but one that impacts the entire economy, right? So do you mind sharing with us a little bit about, you know, what you've learned about the system through these experiences, and then also thinking about, you know, what are people who are on supervision not getting that they need to be able to get to succeed?
Y'all ready for this? Can we educate y'all a little bit? All right. All right, so repeat after me. Collateral consequences. Collateral consequences.
Collateral consequences.
Collateral consequences.
Collateral consequences.
All right.
Like, just be honest, that's not easy to chant, collateral consequences.
All right, so how many of y'all know what collateral consequences is by a show of hands? Okay, cool. We got some folks, we're gonna hear some new information. And we got a little bit time left, so I'll be quick. Collateral consequences are the legal restrictions. There's 40+ thousand legal restrictions that kick in after you serve your time. So imagine doing 5 years and you get out and all of a sudden you realize that you have 40,000 legal restrictions, right? 70% of these are lifetime bans, right? Half of them are employment related. Let's talk about employment for a minute. Employment, we're not just talking about you can't work at a hospital. You can't work in healthcare. You can't work in government. You can't work in education. In certain states, you can't work in finance. So you're locked out of entire industries. And if you live in a town like I come from, North Stockton, California, the growth sectors, the industries that give all the jobs are healthcare education and government. You either work for the county, the school district, or the goddamn jail, right? And you can't do any of those. So you're stuck navigating the low-wage economy. You're stuck going and getting a temp job. How many people in here are formerly incarcerated? How many people in here have a family member formerly incarcerated? So y'all know what I'm talking about, right? You know that the first job is probably something that's a temp agency or a warehouse job, am I right? And they get stuck into these low-wage positions. And on top of that, right, they get stuck into these for a long time. And not only do they get stuck into these low-wage positions, there's something called post-conviction redlining, where you can't even live anywhere you want to. And this wasn't always the case, Jess. This wasn't always the case. Like pre-9/11, right, less than 40% of landlords and 40% of private companies did background checks. Post 9/11 in the fear-based economy, upwards of 90% of both now do background checks. Not because of public safety, but because of the industry. So now you not only can't work anywhere you want to, and you're stuck into this low-wage economy, you can't even live anywhere you want to, so you're stuck in places like East St. Louis or South Stockton. And we're aggregating all these people to those same areas. And what are the other industries that are there? Buy now, pay later. Check cashing, right? Liquor stores. All these industries surround these neighborhoods, these extractive communities, and they're extracting value out of these communities. And people can't leave. And that's just because you have a criminal record. Now bring in probation or parole. Now you have what is disguised as conditions. Say conditions. I call them work restrictions. At Reform, we call them work restrictions. I live in Edgewater, New Jersey. If I was on parole in New Jersey, I couldn't cross that river to come to New York and get me a job. How crazy is that? If Amazon was hiring for the swing shift, and I can only work from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., that's the only job they have, I couldn't get that swing shift job. And God forbid, I get a job at Reform, and guess who shows up? My PO, vest, gun, and badge, pulling me into the bathroom. How embarrassing is that? You gotta go to classes twice a week, midday. So not only if you have a criminal record getting out of prison or jail, you have to face these 40,000 legal restrictions, and you can't work in the growth economy in your community. You have to live in areas that are unsafe and are impoverished, and you are under these work restrictions. So probation and parole has become accelerants to post-conviction poverty. And guess what happens? These 40 to 50 million people with felony convictions in this country are still in this low-wage economy. 10 years later, 20 years later, and what do we say? As a metric for success? Oh, well, at least he's not recidivating. They're doing good. He got that warehouse job. She braiding hair. She's doing good. Is that doing good? Is that doing good? We need to fundamentally change this. What they're not getting is people who get out are some of the most resilient, brilliant individuals you will ever meet in your life, because we know what it understands to lose everything. To lose everything. We have to get out and claw and ask and beg for my humanity back. All I'm saying is let us work. Let me take care of my babies. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm not asking for a free ride. I'm not asking not to be held accountable. So this is very impactful, especially now that all eyes are on the economy, because we don't allow people to work. We're leaving $300 billion in unpaid wages because we don't allow people to work. $87 billion in lost annual GDP because we don't allow people to work. And you may say $87 billion is a drop in a bucket, but it's not a drop in a bucket in the Bronx.
Yes, right.
It's not a drop in a bucket in East St. Louis and South Stockton, because we see what it looks like. Visually, we see what it looks like. And mentally and spiritually, emotionally, the families that are under this know what it feels like. And it's not just us. I'll end with this. It's not just us. It is the people in the household who support us. It's our significant others. We say justice impacted. Yes, you can be formally incarcerated, but I would say my mama, my my wife, my kids are just as impacted as I am. So it's about families as well.
Thank you, Jay. You got me tearing up. Stories are obviously so powerful, right? They're those of us who study policy, who know all the stats, who know all the data, who can come in and recite it for politicians. And sometimes that works, but it's not as impactful as the real stories, the real experience from folks like Jay and many other people on our staff and here in the audience today. And like you, Kemba, and you are the master of storytelling, right? The master of storytelling. BET Plus put out your movie, Kemba, last year. Had to have been a surreal moment to watch yourself, being played by somebody else and see your story play out like that in cinema. But can you talk a little bit about, your journey to storytelling, sharing your story, and really what you've learned over the course of your journey and how that can help us change these laws?
So I made the decision to storytell when I was in prison, and I decided that I was going to say yes to doing an interview where my face was on the cover of Emerge magazine. And thank you to the Black media, because they were the ones that lifted it initially. But basically, when I was in prison, I didn't just see myself. I saw other women that needed to come home too. And so I felt like me highlighting my story would help us all. During that time, the fastest growing population within prison were Black women. And so I saw my parents on the other side on the ground telling my story, without telling the movie. I gave birth to my son while I was incarcerated. And so my son would tour with them and sharing the story. And I saw them work with various different nonprofits. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund took on my case pro bono. I saw them on media interviews speaking about my situation. But when that door opened, I knew that I couldn't forget the women that I left behind and the many other people that deserved the second chance too. So I had a sense of survivor's guilt. And even though my lawyers told me the federal government wasn't happy that I was released, I had 5 years of probation. I had a probation officer, excuse my French, from hell. I won't tell you all, the restrictions, he made me record some of my speeches and tell me what I should and shouldn't be saying. I had to give my blood, and that was like a new thing because you had to give DNA. He would visit my home, even though I told him my son wasn't used to another male being in the household, and he still decided to show up before my son left for school. So in that experience, I didn't care as long as I was speaking my truth, that I was going to continue to share the story, to be a human face for those that I left behind that may not have the LDFs or the media that's paying attention to their stories. So for me, from that experience, it's helped me navigate the power of storytelling and continuously to share the story. And so in doing that, again, like I mentioned before, it's the serving as a credible messenger. But I feel like our credible messengers need to continue to go into higher education spaces, because those are the future stakeholders, decision makers. For me, it was about bringing other people home. And I hope that people in this audience who are formerly incarcerated, because it's not only just sharing your story, you also find different lanes where people are working on various different things. Like I work with Drug Policy Alliance, and basically it was a time where crack versus powder cocaine had 100 to 1 disparity. And so I began to work with that initiative, and we were able to get the Fair Sentencing Act of 2010 to be passed. I worked with the NAACP about felony disenfranchisement because I had lost my right to vote even after I finished my probation and everything. I still had to apply to get my voting rights restored, and went as far as the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland, spoke before high officials in different countries. And I can remember a representative from South Africa saying, isn't America the most democratic nation in the world? Why is it that you still can't vote? And so what I'm wanting to share, anybody formerly incarcerated in the audience, anybody who listens to this, there's a whole movement of us. And I am not unique. All you have to do is find your lane. It's plenty of work out here to do, and empower yourselves to be a part of that change.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Vinny, so these are weird political times out there, right? I know, don't comment. I know you're working for a government agency now, but anybody can see when you turn on the news, there's not a lot of issues that both sides care about. Not a lot of issues that one side fully cares about, right? But yet Reform Alliance and other organizations have been able to pass state bills. We're working on local counties. You know, Reform last year passed the first ever United Nations resolution on this issue, on probation and parole. Why do you think that probation and parole specifically is such a ripe issue, despite all the blowback we see in the criminal justice field and despite all the political division that's going on in the world?
Yep, great question. For one thing, I think for a lot of years, frankly, until Meek Mill, the atrocity of what happened to him elevated this in a much more popular way, right? Guy was on probation for 12 years, never reoffended, and was ultimately revoked and returned to prison for 2 to 4 years for popping a wheelie in a music video and getting in an altercation with a paparazzi, and both of those cases were dismissed. And during that 12 years, like with you, his judge was advising the guy, who was going to make more in a couple of years than this judge made in her whole life, on what he should be putting in his songs. I mean, I kid you not, right? It was that crazy. So that elevated this in a way that it wasn't before, and I think that partly makes it right, because I think a lot of elected officials really wanted to lock more people up, but they had no idea what was going on in probation and parole. I mean, I remember testifying before the chair of the Judiciary Committee in New York about once New York legalizes marijuana, they should make it, you make it so you couldn't be revoked for consuming marijuana. And he didn't understand that you could be revoked for doing things that were legal. He said, give me an example of other things that are legal that you can be revoked for. And I said, happy to, but do you know you said that out loud? Like, you're the head of the Judiciary Committee. You don't know that people can be revoked for crossing county lines, getting a credit card, or drinking a beer? So I think that to actually attempt to answer your question, this was overlooked by advocates, by researchers, by everybody. Meek Mill helped elevate it. Reform has now helped keep that alive. But I still think there's a ton of people that don't know about this. I think you have to figure out what part of this you're going to be in. There's going to be some people that will be able to navigate the halls of power, and they should do that. Some of the rest of you need to pick a fucking fight on this, okay? In a way that you have been for all of these years about mass incarceration. You need to pick that same fight on mass supervision, because these people who are not quite free are very oppressed, and sometimes probation is not an alternative to incarceration. It's just a delayed form of incarceration. If you can elevate this in people's consciousness, that's going to make your job a lot easier, so she won't have to spend the first 20 minutes explaining what probation is when she sits and meets with those people behind those closed doors.
And to your point, Vinny, folks can sign up at reformalliance.com to become a reformer. Thank you. Jay, I know we've only got about a minute here, but you have just been such a force in the office at Reform and working with our organizers who are spanning across states across America. You know, we have Aaron Haney writing all the wonderful policy, but we got to get that policy out there and into communities and build that fight that Vinny's talking about. I won't say that word, but build that fight that Vinny's talking about and tell those stories that Kemba is so great at telling. What is it about having formerly incarcerated messengers that is just so incredibly effective with the community? How is it that they add to the fight, and what are the challenges and opportunities of bringing in folks like you?
Yeah, I mean, so just briefly saying it, I mean, oh, this is tough. I'm gonna get emotional, y'all. Sorry about that. Every time I think about folks who've been locked up in the workplace, it's hard because a lot of folks, like, I mean, think about it, man. While some of y'all were going to college, a lot of us was going to jail, right? And then we get out and we're forced to like navigate a professional environment. And I make it a point, and for those of you who are in the office with me, you're gonna know why I do this. I make it a point to say hi to everybody in the office when I go. And I say bye to everybody when I leave. Because it's that humanity. There's a African like a concept word, it's sawabona. Say it with me, sawabona. It means I see you. I see you.
That's easier than collateral consequences.
Yeah, it is easier than collateral consequences. It means I see you, and I see you in a way where I can't unsee you. You know, I think about all the staff, the Rondos, the Anthony, the Jerrys, the Jared, you know, the Mike, you know, all these folks in the office every day who come in and are navigating these collateral consequences, navigating these conditions, and still come in every day and like with a smile on their face. Like, and are held to a very fucking high standard, because I don't play. They'll tell you, man, I got KPIs up the ass. You know, and we use, I'm like, I don't play. I hold people to a high standard because I know what's at stake. And they come in every single day, and I know they struggling. I know they struggling, but sometimes they are too embarrassed to even say they're struggling, and they're holding that. And all of us, and you have the regular, you know, human shit, and then you have being formerly incarcerated shit, and they're holding both, and it's just amazing to see that. And as an employer, you have to be, like, as a fair chance employer, you have to be cognizant of that, right? And lean into and lead into that. So if somebody has to go and talk to their PO, let them go. You know, don't make them take PTO, right? Very practical things, you know? And I just want to give a huge shout out, because, I mean, Jess, this is all your leadership, man. Like, to be able to, you know, have to restructure and then not fire one formerly incarcerated person. Have to I'm gonna say it again, hold on. I'm gonna say it again. Having to downsize and not fire one formerly incarcerated person. That's huge. That's a testament to leadership. Because we say second chances, but some folks never had a first chance. And it's important because, you know, as Glenn Martin says, the closest to the pain are closest to the solution. And so with, you know, everybody from reform staff, please stand up. I wanna say something to you right now. Everybody from reform staff, please stand up. All of y'all. I want to speak to y'all for 20 seconds, and sorry, Danya, I know I'm over, but I love each and every one of y'all. I appreciate y'all. I didn't come out of retirement from raising my 2 boys and raising my toy poodles and supporting my wife for nothing. I came because of the vision of this woman and the leadership of all of y'all. I know I have very high standards, you know, for those who work under me, but like, y'all are the truth. I fucking love y'all, and thank you so much.
Bleep. All right, well, before Jay really makes me cry on stage here, you guys are all awesome. I know that the audience is gonna walk away wondering what they can do and how they can stay in touch with you, how they can support you. So let's just take 10 seconds each, come down the line. How can we stay in touch? How can we support you? How can we be a part of that change?
Okay, keep it simple. Instagram is Kemba_Smith, but also if you're interested in hosting a screening of the film, because again, it's not just about me. You could have a panel discussion of other formerly incarcerated people to go along with the film to educate the community. You can go to representjustice.org and click on Kemba, and you can figure out hosting a screening in your area. And then just lastly, as we're talking about probation and parole, encourage your state, if they have parole, to diversify their parole board. Oftentimes you can have former law enforcement, former probation, but we need some social workers. We need some spiritual folks. So make sure, and formerly incarcerated people. So thank you, and yeah.
Thank you, Kemba.
I would say, support the Reform Alliance. They're really the tip of the spear on this conversation nationally. But also, if you're involved in advocacy around this issue in your state and you need a probation or parole commissioner, a current or a past one, to testify or speak to elected officials or speak to people in power, I co-founded a group called Executives Transforming Probation and Parole. It's called EXIT, which doesn't spell Executives Transforming Probation and Parole, but it's EXIT, so it's kind of cool. And there's like 100 current and former probation and parole commissioners who would agree with what we just talked about, who are willing to write op-eds, they're willing to talk to electeds, they're willing to speak to groups. So if that's an interest, V. Schiraldi, and just is going to now show you how exactly old I am. V. Schiraldi at AOL.com. You may have heard of that, yes.
First, thank you to UJC, Rock Nation, the whole UJC Advisory Board. If you want to get involved with us, we got easyreform.com, reformalliance.com. Reformalliance.com, super easy. You can follow us on all socials at Reform. We have a booth out there right by the exit. All the staff is there. Go up to them. Don't come up to me. Go to them. Right? If you want to if you want to join the coalitions, if you're in any of the states we operate in, you have an organization, you can join our coalition. If you are a formerly incarcerated person, want to understand about how to change laws and policies and organize, we have our Reform Advocacy Institute. That's all at reformalliance.com. And lastly, man, shout out to all the advocates in the room. If you do this work, if you are doing this work every single day, you know what I mean, from like Until Freedom to Life Camp to Represent Justice, I mean, I see all of y'all. Y'all are the true heroes, man. Thank you so much for your work and keep fighting the good fight.
All right, thank you very much, everybody.